For a more complete immersion, I recommend using headphones. So, according to the will of the deceased, all the property goes to you, Anton Valerievich. If you agree, sign here and here. I looked at the notary in a hurry. Firstly, I did not know that my grandmother had a will. Secondly, I did not even think that she would leave everything to me. My cousin and my aunt looked at me with a heavy gaze and silently left the office. I shook hands with the notary, a man with a rare mustache and the same rare hair, and was about to leave when he called me. And here is what I forgot to say. The will of the deceased has a separate point, and it, how to put it, is a little strange. Strange? What is it? In general, Svetlana Filipovna wanted you to take the soil from her grave exactly 40 days after her death and scatter it all around the house. Her house, which now belongs to you as I have already told you, and 78,000 rubles in her savings book. He repeated it for the third time, checking with the papers. Okay, anything else? No, that's all. I understand that your grandmother was a rather peculiar person, but when she came to verify the will, it seemed to me that it was really important for her. I understand, I mumbled a little. Thank you. Goodbye. My grandmother, indeed, was always special, unlike other grandmothers. She painted her lips with a bloody red lipstick, used expensive perfume that was brought to her from God knows where, and wore bright clothes that were not at all typical of grandmothers. In the village, they said that she was a witch, but I never really believed those superstitious rumors. Despite the fact that she looked different from everyone, my grandmother was as affectionate, loving, and caring as all other grandmothers. I spent all my vacations in her village. The winter day began with my grandmother heating the stove. The cozy smell of coals spread throughout the house, and the house, which had managed to cool down overnight, was filled with the usual warmth. Then my grandmother would start cooking. As I said, she was not like other grandmothers. She was bad at cooking. The cookies tasted like cardboard, the pies were always burnt, and the cheese curds were terribly salted. But I still ate and pretended that I liked it very much. I didn't want to offend my grandmother. I tried to do everything not to upset her. When I found out that my grandmother had passed away, I honestly cried like a child. I loved her very much, even though I had been visiting her quite rarely lately. Work, business. Now I regret it. My grandmother lived alone in a small village. Everyone had already left there for a long time, or died there. I constantly urged her to move to the city, but she always refused. She claimed that she had lived her whole life in her house and would die in it. It was useless to argue. I called my grandmother every week, and when she didn't pick up the phone the next Sunday, I got worried. I called the police, although they were reluctant to accept the call. The body of my grandmother was found on the third day after her death. She had already begun to decay, and maggots and blowflies crawled on her chest. The first few days I couldn't believe what had happened. I couldn't work, I couldn't sleep, but then I had to accept it. My grandmother was 85 years old, a respectable age. Apparently, her time had come. For 40 days, I went to the cemetery, put down flowers, cleaned my grandmother's grave, and collected some soil as she wanted. I couldn't just ignore her last will. Probably it was very important for her. From the cemetery, I immediately headed to the village. As a child, this place seemed to me almost magical. In winter, the mountains and sleds, games with neighboring children, trips to the river in the summer, and the chirping of crickets. But now the village met me unkindly. Half-destroyed houses, tattered fences. Only my grandmother's house looked lived in. I opened the door with my key and entered. I was met by stagnant, rotten air and dust. First of all, I opened all the windows to ventilate the house. The mirrors were covered with black cloth. I wanted to remove it, but first, I decided to deal with the main mission for which I came. I took the jar and began to walk around the house slowly, leaving behind a path of cemetery soil. When the circle closed, there was nothing left in the jar. And why did my grandmother need this? Probably she wanted to leave part of herself in the house after death. She loved this place. I went into the house. Now it, like the village, looked unkind, although it used to seem to me the best place on earth. Suddenly, raindrops began to fall on the roof. Just what I needed, a thunderstorm, I thought. In the rain, all the roads in the village would wash out so much that I wouldn't be able to drive through anything on my light truck. I shivered, but immediately thought, well, I'll stay for the night. What's the big deal? In childhood, I often spent long evenings with my grandmother in this house. There was no electricity then. We lit candles, and my grandmother told me all sorts of stories, until my eyes began to droop, and I fell asleep right at the table. Now, there was no electricity either. Apparently, it turned off because of the bad weather, or God knows why. I lit a few candles, put them on the windowsill, and took out a dusty photo album from the shelf. Anyway, there was nothing else to do. Looking at the photo cards, I smiled. Here is my grandmother, young and determined, with her unchangeable red lipstick. Next to her is me, a baby with a serious face. The photos were so bright, as if someone had revived the fragments of time, imprinting our old life. But the longer I looked at them, the more I noticed strange details. In a few shots, my grandmother was standing in front of the house, and her shadow seemed unnaturally large. It spread in different directions like ink stains. At some point, it even seemed to me that the shadow was stretching its hand towards me. My heart jumped. Probably just tired, I thought, and closed the album. In any case, these are just old photos. It was already late, and I went upstairs. A creaky bed and a warm blanket were waiting for me there. However, it turned out to be not so easy to fall asleep. As I had feared, the rain grew into a real thunderstorm. The thunder echoed off the walls and lightning tore through the sky outside the windows. I almost fell asleep when, in the distance, I heard a barely distinguishable knock. Probably a drop on the roof, I thought, and burrowed deeper into the blanket. But the sound became clearer, as if someone was knocking on the door. The knock intensified, became more persistent. It spread from everywhere, from the walls next to the bed, from the window, from the corners of the room, as if something invisible was besieging the house from the outside. I felt uneasy, but I could no longer ignore this sound, and gathering my strength, I slowly went down. It was pitch dark downstairs. Suddenly it seemed to me that if I opened the door, I would fall into an abyss. I wanted to step back, but some force pushed me forward. You are an adult man. What is there to be afraid of? It's just a thunderstorm. Or maybe someone needs help out there. With these thoughts, I yanked the door open, and a gust of wind, soaked with the smell of damp earth and something rotten, broke into the house. My eyes gradually got used to the storm-smeared darkness. Horrible. A human figure was half bent, and something alive was writhing in its hands, and I looked at it with disbelief in my eyes. It was a cat. Its wailing hiss and hoarse howl were barely heard through the noise of the thunder. Suddenly, the hiss went silent, and the creature that held the cat with some inhuman hunger stuffed its teeth into the body of the poor beast, tearing it apart. This moment felt endless. And suddenly, the figure slowly raised its head, as if feeling my gaze. In the darkness, two cold eyes, filmed with blood, stared back. The wailing wind in my face felt like death itself, hungry and gloomy. I stepped back and suddenly heard a cold voice calling my name, almost whispering, "Antosha." I tried to catch my breath, but the cold got into my chest and my lips were numb from the horror. Finally, I pulled myself together, and the sun shone brightly outside the window. The morning had come a long time ago. It was just a dream, I thought. Only a dream, and nothing more. I stretched and looked at the dust dancing in the sunbeams. Surprisingly, I noticed that despite the terrible dream, I felt great. I had already forgotten how wonderful it was to wake up in the village. The air was cozy, my grandmother's blanket, the smell of a heated stove, the whistle of a teapot. Stop. I suddenly jumped up, and everything inside me went cold. I did not heat the stove, and I could not have put a teapot on. But at the same time, I clearly heard it whistling below, and more than that, steps. Maybe someone broke in, I thought. Just a tourist who got lost, decided to wait in an abandoned house and climbed in at night, but I didn't hear him. Alas, these thoughts did not calm me down. There was nothing upstairs that could serve as a weapon. I just had to carefully and quietly go down. I overcame the first step, the second, the third. It creaked treacherously. My boy woke up. It got dark in my eyes. It was the voice of my grandmother. I could not confuse it with anything. But she had been lying in the cemetery for 40 days, 20 kilometers from this house. My heart hammered in my chest. Somehow I got a grip on myself and went down. In the kitchen, someone was really bustling with mugs and plates. I stepped towards the door and, looking into the opening, froze like a statue. My grandmother was standing next to the stove. She was fussing, holding a kettle in her hands, and as usual, quietly muttering under her breath that she didn't have time to wake me. My gaze immediately noticed that something was wrong. Her face, familiar to the smallest wrinkles, was a dead gray. Blue spots crawled on her cheeks, uneven and bulging, death spots. In her flesh, here and there, were disgusting larvae, and the smell. At first, I did not understand what it was, but then it came to me. Grandmother carried a dead smell, a smell of rotten vanilla. I could not confuse this smell with anything, her favorite perfumes. Only now they smelled like a morgue, generously sprayed with chemicals, and from this combination, I was barely able to keep from vomiting. Grandmother's lips were thickly smeared with a bright red lipstick. This shade looked terrible on her dead pale face. It could not correct the horror that had come before my eyes. "Why are you standing there? Come here, hug grandmother." Her voice was gentle, familiar, but too unnatural, like the creak of floorboards in dead silence. She moved towards me, stretching her hands. I saw her fingers, dry, twisted, reaching for me. Her nails were black. The grave soil from which she had come back was constantly caked under them. I stepped back. The icy horror shook my body and my tongue. Stuttering, I squeezed out, "Grandmother, you died. How did you end up here?" She laughed quietly. "With your help, my dear. Now we will live together, you and I. And we will live well, just like before." and then she took a step towards me, from which the horror overwhelmed me. She was standing very close. The smell of death, sprinkled with the scent of perfume, firmly gripped my throat and did not allow me to breathe. I felt my back leaning against the wall. There was nowhere to retreat. Grandmother slightly bowed her head, and her eyes, in which the fire of life had recently burned, now looked dull and empty, like a dead fish on a counter. "Antashenka, grandson, you don't look yourself. Didn't you miss your grandmother? Didn't you wait for me?" Her voice was rumbling. "I missed you," I squeezed out. She smiled so kindly that my head was spinning. It was still my grandmother, only different. "Well done," she said softly, turning to the table. "And now, help me, grandson." Without me, the house is completely empty, you see. There is dust on the windows, garbage on the floor, plates in the sink. "You have always been good to me," grandmother continued. "Go, take a bucket, get some water, then bring firewood, and while I'm doing the ironing, we'll drink tea with pies." Her voice, dear and caring, it was as if her funeral 40 days ago simply had not happened. In my head, thoughts went crazy. Run away from here while you still can. But another voice persistently whispered, "This is your grandmother. She has returned. Didn't you want everything to be as it was before? Did you not regret that you spent too little time with her? This is your chance to fix everything." The indecision lasted for a moment that felt like an eternity, and then I reached for the bucket. Work at home went slowly, but it was good to give myself time to think and bring my thoughts in order. She returned. "It doesn't matter how. It's my grandmother. I loved her. That is, I still love her. Can I drive her away?" Number. Her place is in the grave or here with me. With these thoughts, I dragged the water, chopped the firewood. At that time, grandmother quietly hummed and cooked something in the kitchen. This humming, although a little fake, returned me to my childhood again. When I returned to the house, she had already set the table. The pies looked appetizing, but their smell was, to put it mildly, unusual. The sickly sweet aroma of rot penetrated through the sweet smell of the filling. However, my grandmother looked at me so affectionately that I could not refuse. I bit off a piece, hardly holding back a gag reflex, and swallowed it with a smile. "Delicious, grandmother," I said. She laughed and put a cup of tea in front of me. "Here, with herbs." Do you remember, like in childhood, I remembered. Grandmother always knew what herbs to brew to calm, cure, or simply warm the soul. Her tea was healing. I took a sip. It tasted like medicine, bitter, burning, but a pleasant warmth immediately spread over my body. Memories flowed with it. How grandmother told me about each plant, how we collected them in the summer, how she cured me from a cold. "I see you liked it," she said, waving her hand. Something white flaked off. At first I thought it was dust, but then I saw that it was larvae that fell from her shoulder. And then I realized, I don't care anymore. It was my grandmother, alive or dead, but still mine. I couldn't abandon her or betray her. "Grandmother, maybe we'll uncover the mirrors." "Well, since you're back." "Don't, dear. I don't want to see myself like this. You understand." She shook her head sadly. "I understand, grandmother. Everything is fine." All day long, I acted like an automaton. She came to life, walked around the house, indicated what and where to do. I had to clear the snow, go to the garden for potatoes. I didn't have time to catch my breath. By evening, my fatigue had changed to a strange calm. Grandmother's tea was on the table again, and we sat down to look at an old photo album. "This is your mother when she went to the first grade. Look how funny she is with the ribbons," Grandmother laughed. And I could spend all my evenings like this. Grandmother laughed and told stories, and I, a little boy, sat and listened to the amazing sound of her melodic voice. She scrolled through the pages, telling stories about how her grandfather caught a fish from a cliff, how she danced at holidays when she was young, how she barely carried me, a 5-year-old, along the river. Each picture came alive in her hands. As I listened to her, I laughed with her. For a moment, I even forgot about everything, that Grandmother was dead, that her smell permeated everything around. She was next to me, and in her voice sounded the same warm care as before. Before going to bed, I kissed her cheek. It came out almost automatically, as if by habit. But then I froze. Her skin was cold and wet, and a shiver ran down my spine, but I suppressed the disgust and tried to smile. "Good night, Grandmother." "Good night, grandson." She gently stroked my head. In the morning, I barely got out of bed. My body was aching. My legs barely moved. It seemed as if someone had drained all the strength out of me. Probably nerves. "Nothing surprising if you remember what happened yesterday," I said to myself, swinging my legs down. Grandmother was already waiting, cheerful and seemingly younger, as if yesterday had charged her with energy. "Come on, Antosha, eat, and then help me chop wood. Then we'll sort out the junk in the yard, and by lunch we'll drink tea and chat like yesterday." I nodded, unable to argue. After lunch, we sat at the table again and drank her tea. It still tasted disgusting, but I was sure that if anything could cheer me up, it was Grandmother's herbs. "I only came back for you, Antosha," she said, looking straight into my eyes. "For me?" I was surprised. "Of course, my dear. Without me, who will take care of you, bake pies, make tea?" I smiled, feeling a strange warmth. "Thank you, Grandmother." "It's nothing, grandson. We will now live together for a long, long time," she smiled mysteriously. "For a long time?" I asked again. Suddenly, something pricked inside me. My life, my work. I took a vacation. It will end soon. Why are you talking about work? She waved her hand as if it was nothing. "It's okay, grandson. Everything will be fine." And she smiled again, but for some reason, my back was covered with cold and sticky sweat from this smile. Days went by like in a movie, one quickly following the other. Each one was like 2 drops of water to the one before. I worked around the house. Grandmother was in the kitchen. In the evenings we chatted, remembering the past. Only, with my body, something strange happened. Every day I became weaker and weaker. My strength left me so quickly that even in the morning after a long sleep, I could barely get out of bed. My body was heavy, as if I had been carrying bags of sand for days. But Grandmother would insist. "It's okay, Antoshenka. My tea will quickly put you on your feet." And I drank it every day. The bitterness seemed to become softer, and the taste began to remind me of something far away and familiar. A thought was spinning in my head that it was worth stopping, but Grandmother's look, heavy, persistent, did not leave a choice. A few days have passed, or maybe a week, I no longer counted. Time flowed according to its own very strange laws. I began to break out in sores. My skin cracked as if it couldn't bear its own weight. Ulcers appeared on my hands, the pain of which accompanied each movement. "Grandmother," I barely managed to squeeze out at dinner, "I think I got sick." "It's okay, grandson. I'll make you a cup of tea now. It'll fix everything." I drank, although it was even difficult to hold a cup. My hands were shaking. My legs did not listen at all. I walked around the house like a shadow, clinging to the walls. I thought about my life in the city with some kind of endless sadness. I remembered the voices of colleagues, evening dinners in a cafe, the smell of morning coffee. It all seemed distant, as if it had happened to someone else. At some point I realized that time had simply lost its meaning. Everything seemed to be eternal. "How long have I been here, grandmother?" I asked. My voice was as hoarse and deaf as if from a well. "Just 3 days, Antoshenka. What's wrong with you?" she replied, patting me on the shoulder. 3 days. It was hard to believe. My thoughts were confused. Reality became dim like a fog. I did not remember when I was on the street for the last time. I did not know how long I could live like that. One day, looking at a cup of tea, an ulcer appeared on my cheek. I touched my face with my hand. The skin was dry, hard, like paper. I felt a crack from which something was oozing. My heart froze. When I got up, I slowly shuffled to the bathroom where there was a mirror covered in black cloth. I had wanted to uncover it for a long time, but I could not break grandmother's rule. Now, I had to know. I had to see. I suddenly pulled the cloth off and screamed. An old man was looking at me. His face was wrinkled, shriveled like a mummy. Sores covered his skin with dead spots. His eyes were sunken in the shadows of their sockets. "So, you've seen my grandson." I heard a voice behind my back. In the mirror, her reflection was young. Fresh skin, clear eyes, strong hands. She was standing behind me, and in the mirror, her face looked the same as mine had just a few days ago, full of life. I turned around. "Grandmother?" I croaked, suffocating. She smiled with her bloody red predatory lips. I rushed to the kitchen. My legs were entangled. My heart was beating so loudly that it seemed it would burst. Everything was mixed in my head. On the table was the same evil cup with tea, from which a thin steam rose. Now I understood everything, and from one look at it, I almost retched. "No!" I screamed and swept the cup to the floor. The liquid spilled, and there was a hiss. The wooden floor began to smoke as if I had spilled acid. The wood darkened and melted before my eyes. I froze looking at it, and everything in my chest burst. "So that's how," I exhaled, my head spinning. "You poisoned me all this time. Witch. You are really a witch." "Well, what are you, grandson? I just wanted to help you." I turned around. This was my grandmother. But this was no longer the grandmother I knew. Young, rosy, with a shine in her eyes. She looked exactly like in the old photos, when she was still in her prime. "You sucked the life out of me. Youth, strength." My voice trembled like my whole body. "I love you. I'm your grandson." She just smiled. Her face turned a little sad, as if she really regretted everything. "Antoshenka?" She came closer, her steps light, barely audible. "I love you too, of course." She leaned down to me. She was very gentle, but I always loved life more. Milk, sausages, potatoes. I was walking around the store. The day had turned out to be heavy. My head refused to work. My concentration was at 0. I really wanted to sleep, but I wanted to eat more. The refrigerator is empty. I didn't have time to do anything with this work, and the output is zero. They will definitely fire me. I worked as a manager's assistant in a small company. Minimum salary, maximum requirements. In the eyes of the management, the dirtiest work was always on me. Even the secretaries in our office were treated with much more respect than me. But I had to endure. I just graduated from the institute, and I didn't have rich parents who would help me get a good start. I had no father. He died before I was born. My mother didn't tell me about him, and I didn't pry. I had to do everything myself. I had to study hard to get in. I had to get into college myself, and I had to get a job myself. As it turned out, the independence of the brain and heart. While I was cramming for exams, my classmates, whose parents had connections, were assigned to cool positions in big companies. And this despite the fact that it was scary to look at their diplomas. What can I say about their brains? Well, I ended up where I ended up. I worked 12 hours a day. At home, all I think about is work. I don't have time to get a girlfriend. I see my friends once a year, but I don't have time to find myself. It turns out, so. I continued to wander around the store, for the 100th time spinning unhappy thoughts in my head, when I almost ran into some man. And, excuse me, I looked at him. An old-fashioned beige suit, which was worn at the end of the 90s. A coat of the same years, an absolutely gray face, and a little wrinkled film. He looked at me without blinking, and smiled. Excuse me, I didn't want to. I muttered again, thinking that this terrible man would move away or answer something like, nothing, nothing. With a word, he would give at least some reaction. But he did not move, and continued to frown with a smile that seemed to be glued to his face. I was awkward, squeezed sideways past him, and ran as fast as possible to the cashier. The goosebumps ran on the spine. A strange type, I thought, already on the street, and just in case, added a step, dreaming of how quickly I could get home. I lived on the outskirts of the city. Areas like mine are commonly called unfavorable, and there is a reason for that. My apartment is more like a warehouse. I was waiting at home for an untidy bed, another scandal among the neighbors, and a thick layer of dust that covered the shelves, windows, TV, everything except the work table. I took a deep breath and promised myself to clean up on the weekends. Yeah. How? I'm sure I'll have to work all weekend again. I went to the kitchen, quickly fried the potatoes, swallowed it without feeling the taste, and immediately fell asleep. And how much longer will I last? A thought ran through my head before I fell asleep. The nightmares tormented me all night. I dreamed of the boss, a ton of reports, some screams, and that terrible man from the store. In my dream, he stood again and looked at me with a smile. His head and shoulders were sprinkled with earth, and worms were burying in his eyes. Is it worth saying that after such a fun night, I woke up completely broken? Good morning. I brushed my nose and went to get ready for work. Coffee, cigarettes, clothes, keys, subway. I drove and even stood and managed to spit with my nose. There are 5 more stations ahead, the day has just begun, and the feeling is as if I was moved by a roller coaster. Suddenly, I saw this, and I took it off with my hand. I even screamed out of surprise. In the next car was the man from the store yesterday. He leaned against the window and, without blinking, looked straight at me. The same smile was glued to his face. I pushed people apart and left as soon as possible to the other end of the car. I ran out to the next station and took a breath. And then I laughed, nervously. Well, man, I saw him for the second time, but it happens. Maybe he also recognized me after yesterday, so he smiled. But his terrible look did not come out of his head. I went to the next train and tried to get rid of my anxiety. Of course I was late for work. The boss didn't even say anything, just looked at me with a despicable look. I apologized and went to my workplace. The day was especially long this time. Reports, endless calls, documents. At some point I thought that I had literally buried my life under this speck of paper. My mood became even worse. I spent lunch at the work table. Coffee and sandwiches are my eternal and faithful friends. While I was looking through the next folder with documents and chewing dried bread with winded sausage, my work phone called. Maybe I shouldn't take it. I have a legal break after all, I thought. But then I took the phone and introduced the face of the boss. And now he is sitting in some expensive restaurant. I was envious, I thought. A rustle was heard from the phone. "Hello!" I screamed. "I can't hear you!" In response, silence was heard. "Yes?" I answered again. And this time I heard something. Breathing. Heavy, hoarse breathing with whistling. As if the person at the end of the wire had something stuck in his throat and he could not breathe. I suddenly froze. I could not say a word, only listened to this evil breathing in the phone. Hell knows why, but I clearly imagined that the person at the end of the wire was smiling. I suddenly dropped the phone. I put my palm on my forehead. I had a cold sweat. What the hell? Maybe someone is playing me. But who? I went to the toilet and washed myself, trying to come to myself. Probably just my imagination was playing. But I imagined that God knows everything. There are problems with communication. This happens. It really happens. With hope, I asked myself, but did not feel relief. The rest of the working day, I was not myself. Everything fell out of hand and I did not answer. I was stupid. I sent letters and messages wrong, and right before leaving home, I managed to fill an important folder with documents, coffee. The anger of the boss did not make me wait long. "Come to my office, quickly!" he screamed, seeing the mess that I made. I was waiting for a powerful analysis of flights. I heard how stupid I am, how hard it is now to find normal employees, and that they took me only for nothing. I was standing in the boss's office with a gloomy face. I was literally torn apart by anger and injustice. When I tried to remember all the reworkings, the absence of weekends, nights that I spent in the office, the boss just turned away, showing that the conversation was over. I silently left the office and, boiling with humiliation, went home. I boiled buckwheat at home and had dinner. Then, for about an hour, I just watched TV. Trying to get out of my head today, nothing worked out. I went to bed at about midnight, but I couldn't sleep. It was worth closing my eyes as a terrible smile rose before my inner gaze, and non-living gray eyes pulled by the quiver. After suffering for about an hour, I got up, went out to the balcony and smoked. The night was warm, quiet, which is very atypical for our district. Usually at such a time on the street, you can always hear some drunk quarrels, fights, or sad songs that the locals love. And here, as if everyone had died out. I looked around the yard and suddenly I saw him. Despite the warm weather, he was wearing the same suit and coat. He stood right under my balcony and looked into my eyes. There was still the same damn smile on his face. What does he want from me? Why is he pursuing me? This time I was really scared. My body was shaking. I threw out the cigarette and ran back into the apartment, slamming the door behind me. What to do? What to do? I took the phone in my hands, quickly dialed 112 and pressed the call button. I dropped it, thought a little, and dialed again. Emergency services, what happened to you? I'm being persecuted here. Some kind of man. Is he in your apartment now? Are you being threatened? No, he's just standing under the windows and looking, smiling. Repeat. He's smiling, I say. He's staring at me with this smile on his face. Before that, I saw him in the subway, still in the store. He's following me, you know. He called me for work. I don't know what he wants. He's just looking and smiling. That is, nothing threatens your life, right? Yes, that is, no, I stuttered, already understanding how stupid it sounds, everything that I just threw out on the operator in hysterics. Okay, let's go. Sorry. I put the phone down, walked around the room for a few minutes, politely thinking what to do. Then I quietly came up to the window, pushed the curtains and looked outside. When I saw him, everything inside turned upside down, as if a million ice needles pierced me at once. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. The body seemed to be paralyzed. The dead man's lifeless eyes were a few centimeters away from me. He looked straight into the window, and his face stretched out the same nasty smile. This is impossible. A dream of hallucinations. The fourth floor. How is he? Thoughts were confused. Fear squeezed the heart into a fist. I don't know how long it continued, how long I couldn't take my eyes off these eyes and smile. But at some point I got out of the clutches and suddenly pulled the curtains. I rushed to the door and checked that it was locked on all the locks, and then climbed under the blanket, as I did in childhood, when I was afraid of the darkness or fictional monsters under the bed. Only this monster was not fictional, but quite real. I knew I saw him. I didn't go crazy. I didn't sleep all night, shaking off every rustle. Sometimes I came up to the window, but I didn't dare to look out. I was afraid to see these eyes and smile again. In the morning, I fell asleep. I woke up only at noon. I finally overslept. I didn't even brush my teeth. I quickly pulled my clothes and ran out of the house. On the way to work and in the subway, I was constantly looking around, twitching from every random touch, and it always seemed to me that I saw him. But no, a terrible man in a cloak was nowhere to be seen. Coming out of the subway, I ran across the street and shot a bullet into the office. There, I faced the boss. He looked at me with an icy look, but he didn't even listen to my excuses. He quickly turned around and left. I had nothing left to do but go and pack my things. And all this in the eyes of the rest of the office. Tens of eyes were watching me. In their eyes, there was not even a drop of sympathy. To hell with all this, and your work to hell, and the office. But my mood even improved a little. I felt free as never before. But then I remembered that even for my halupa you need to pay something. And without work, I just won't be able to afford to pay for housing. Long days of complete care followed the dismissal. I tried to find a new place and collected things in parallel. The rental contract was over. There was no money. I had to go back to my mother. I couldn't afford another roof over my head. We were together again. My mother didn't mind, but I just went crazy from the silence. If it weren't for this man outside the window, I wouldn't have overslept and wouldn't have lost my job, and I would have lived like before. Sometimes I thought, alas, I was not able to change the past. One evening I came back from another failed interview. My mood was lousy. My mother asked me to come here as soon as possible. Well, what else? I was not happy. I entered the room and my eyes were rounded by themselves. The TV screen showed people in the form of the Ministry of Internal Affairs who were going back and forth. The lights of the ambulance, the police. Against the background of all this fuss, the house with broken windows rose. Half of it was destroyed. Somewhere else the fire raged, which had not yet been extinguished. The street of Metal Ergov 33. It was in this house that the office of the company from which I was fired was located just a couple of weeks ago. And now, in the place of the office, there were solid debris. They say, gas, explosion, 30 people died, my mother whispered in horror. Not everyone was pulled out of the debris, but you could be there, Sasha. What a horror! So he saved me, it turns out. And then I told my mother everything that had happened to me in the last week. Before that, I was afraid to open my mouth. I thought I was going crazy, but I couldn't stand it. The news about the explosion of the office completely knocked me out of the tracks. I told in detail about the man who was chasing me, about firing, about his face behind the window. When I described his eyes, smile, his clothes and appearance, my mother snorted loudly and pressed her hands against her face. Then she pulled out and climbed somewhere on the tablecloth. Mom, what are you doing? Wait a minute. Somewhere here. Yes, here. She returned holding a piece of paper in her hands. A newspaper cutout. I took it in my hands and it got dark in my eyes. From the photo in the newspaper, the same man was looking at me in the same suit. Only the eyes were alive, and the smile was laughable and warm. March 31st, 1999. In the 30th year of his life, Alexei Vorobiev, a loving son, a loyal husband, a devoted and responsible employee, quickly died. His life was cut short as a result of an accident at an enterprise where Alexei Ivanovich worked for 15 years of his life. The collective of the enterprise expresses sincere condolences to his widow and family. Eternal memory. Mom. I said it slowly, still in shock. Who is this?
Sasha, this is your dad.
After his death, I took the girl's last name and wrote you under it. She gently stroked the faded photo. Then I decided to start my life from a clean sheet. That's the only thing I left. We kept silent. He probably came to see you. Yes. I didn't know what to say. Probably. I went to the window, looked down, and saw him. He was no longer a terribly unfamiliar man, but a father. He stood, looked at me, and smiled. I smiled at him in response. The end. Masha had a hard time lowering the box to the floor. She bent over and exhaled. The last one. But hello, new life. Smiling, she quietly set about herself, her apartment. She had been saving on it for several years, since the days of college. Of course, she had to work hard and refuse everything, but it was worth it. Without any mortgage, without debts and loans, her honest 42 square meters, which she did not need to share with anyone. Masha still could not believe in her happiness. The apartment was in an old 9-story building. Low ceilings. But the area is good, quiet, calm. Mostly families and young couples lived here. And the price for the apartment was nice. The realtor said that Masha was very lucky, that this is a chance for $1 million, and that he should be grabbed without thinking. Masha did it. She left her parents' apartment. In a couple of days, she moved all the things, such as boxes, to make the apartment cozy, which curtains will hang in the kitchen, and which wallpaper will stick in the hallway. There were a lot of things, but all of them were pleasant. One of the first evenings, Masha knocked on the door opposite. "Who is there?" A weak female voice broke out from behind the door. "I am your new neighbor, Masha. I came to meet you." The neighbor immediately hurried to open the door. It was a little old lady with gray hair and a kind smile.
"My favorite apple. And how did you guess? My name is Nina Alexandrovna. Come in." Nina Alexandrovna turned out to be very hospitable and chatty. Masha immediately told everything about the neighbors and the house. "Ravyakins live upstairs. They just had a baby. Misha lives under you, but he works all day. And now he went to his friends for all weekends. You won't see him soon. We still have Valentina on the site, my friend, and Rita with Valera. They still have such a big dog. Once every 3 months, we gather at all the entrances to the meeting." Nina Alexandrovna smiled, and something strange flashed in her eyes. "Well, this is what your boss will tell you about the entrance. What else? We live here all friendly. We help each other, support each other. We go to visit with apple pies." Masha laughed. The old woman reminded her of her grandmother, and Masha laughed with humor and with a smile. "You know what, if you need something, come in. I'm always at home. How can I help you? Do not hesitate. And don't be afraid if you hear something at night," the old woman added. "The house is old, and the walls are thin, and the children sometimes cry. You'll get used to it." But, looking at the clock, she saw that it was too late, so she just nodded and got ready to go home. At home, she threw the apartment away with a look. Despite the fact that the process of survival was going fast inside, chaos prevailed. Things were hanging from boxes. Something was lying right on the floor. The bed was covered with wrapping paper and bags. "We should throw it all out, otherwise there is no free space anyway," thought Masha. Fortunately, the garbage line was right in the house, and I didn't want to walk in the dark on the street. Having collected all the garbage, Masha opened the door and went out to the entrance. He met her with a weak light. The light bulb on the ceiling blinked as if it were about to burn out. A sharp plaster clipped around in places, exposing old concrete, and shadows were deepening in the corners. The windows, narrow and muddy, threw a layer of dust. Only the ghostly stripes of light from the lanterns passing by the cars were missing. Masha shuddered. During the day, this place looked much more friendly. Jumping over the steps, she went down and opened the heavy, rusted cover of the garbage line. The air hit her face with a raw, stinking smell. The rusted paste of the garbage line was gazing at Masha in thick darkness. From the darkness came the silenced sounds. Either the wind was blowing in the mine, or the rustles, as if something was spinning at the bottom. Probably cockroaches or rats. The girl was moved away from the cold. She hurried to get rid of the garbage, quickly closed the lid, and only then noticed a small children's sock lying on the floor nearby. He looked as if he had been thrown there many years ago. Old, almost worn out, with a cartoon pink rabbit barely noticeable in the dirt. Raising the sock, Masha suddenly heard a quiet wheeze, then another one. It seemed that a very small child was crying. The neighbor warned that a family with a baby lives upstairs, but the sound did not come from there. It came from below, from where the garbage had just fallen. Masha shuddered with her whole body. A strange child's wheeze also rang in her ears, forcing the skin to be covered with goosebumps. She swallowed and stepped back, not taking her eyes off the garbage. Masha was waiting for the sound to repeat, but no, everything was quiet.
It became quiet again in the entrance. Well, you're a fool, she thought, trying to return the common sense. Who knows which sounds are in the mine? Maybe old pipes are buzzing, or something else. She tried to take herself in her hands and took another step back. Masha understood that she had to leave, but the body did not listen. The heart beat so hard that the head went round. Suddenly, the sound came from the garbage of the wire again, thin, long, and almost begging. "Mom." From the horror, Masha almost dropped the keys. This voice was too alive, as if someone was thrown into the darkness of the mine, and now he desperately hoped that he would hear it. This is all nerves. Masha calmed herself down, but it seemed to her that even the walls were looking at her carefully. Probably someone left the radio nanny on, or the neighbor's children turned on the TV too loudly. However, the cold, sticky palms and sweat running down my back gave out fear. Masha did not believe in herself. A moment passed, another one. The legs finally took a step. 1, 2, 3. Masha was running to the apartment without looking back, as if they were chasing her. Flying inside, she slammed the door, pressed on the lock, and pressed against it with her back. There was silence around, but the fingers continued to tremble, and that child's voice was still sounding in my head. What to do? Wake up the neighbors? Call the police? Masha unlocked the mobile phone and just stood in front of the screen. No, this is nonsense, complete nonsense. It can't be that a child was sitting in the garbage dump. No one will believe it. And Masha did not want to wake up. It seemed to me that there was nothing, she firmly said to herself. Just a new house, new sounds. Besides, I almost did not sleep for the last 24 hours. These are nerves and nothing more. My heart slowly calmed down. My breathing became smoother. And then Masha felt something soft in her right hand. Machinely looking down, she saw that she was still holding in her hand the same old children's sock that she had picked up from the garbage dump. Now it seemed to her that the cute pink rabbit was going to get angry, as if laughing at her fear. All night, Masha turned around, falling into strange, disturbing dreams. She dreamed of dirty corridors, dull light of lamps in the entrance, and endless children's whispers, quiet, almost like a whisper. And also the face of a boy, very small, 3 years old, with empty, dead eyes. By the morning she was exhausted, but soon fell into a hard sleep without nightmares. But the feeling of anxiety did not disappear anywhere. For breakfast, Masha tried to understand what had happened. Her brain gave out a completely logical explanation. A blurred memory, warmed up by the nerves from the move, an exacerbated perception of new sounds. But something did not work out, because the child's voice was so clear. She decided that she should try to carefully ask the neighbors about this sound, so as not to cause suspicions. On the way to work, Masha just ran into a neighbor on the site, Nina Alexandrovna's girlfriend. It was a full-fledged woman, 60 years old, with a tightly assembled bunch of dark hair and a strict gaze. Seeing Masha, the neighbor nodded politely. "Good morning. You are probably Valentina. I heard about you from Nina Alexandrovna." Masha smiled. "That's right, dear," Valentina nodded, throwing Masha with a tenacious look. "Well, how are your first impressions?" "Very cozy. The house is old, of course, but the atmosphere here is special. True, last night I seem to have heard a child's cry. Such a strange sound, you don't know whose child it could be." Valentina's face immediately changed, as if someone turned off the light in it. The look became rigid, even prickly, and the smile disappeared as if it had not been there.
cry, you say?" Coldly she asked again, turning away from the door. "We have almost no children here, except those on top, but it is unlikely." The neighbor looked at the clock and said goodbye briefly, even without looking at Masha. She felt an unpleasant cold inside. A strange woman, Masha thought, but decided not to knock this head off. The whole day went by in business. After work, Masha ran around the construction store in search of suitable shoes and paint. Then she ran to the furniture store and picked up a comfortable chair for reading. In a day, she was so washed out that she was sure. This night, no sounds will prevent her from sleeping soundly without any strange thoughts. Late in the evening, returning home with heavy bags, she met a couple with a small child at the elevator. These were young, slightly tired parents, whom Nina Alexandrovna mentioned the day before. Masha decided that this was a chance to finally clarify the situation. "Good evening. Are you neighbors from the 8th? I, Masha, entered this week. You know, I heard someone crying last night. Is this not your baby? He is very small, probably still often wakes up." A young woman looked at her husband, and he immediately took his eyes off, as if embarrassed by something. The woman nodded, smiled uncertainly, but did not answer anything, only pressed the baby harder as if protecting him. "Well, it happens sometimes," his father muttered, barely looking at Masha. "Well, it's not him. Sorry, our floor." They quickly left, leaving her alone in the elevator. The doors closed, and Masha felt that something dark was wrapping around the house, as if there were her own unwritten rules that no one was going to tell her about. Masha soon had dinner at home and immediately lay in bed. Tiredness took over. The eyelids instantly filled with lead, and she quickly fell asleep. But very soon, something tore her out of her sweet embrace of sleep and made her suddenly wake up. The clock showed midnight. Suddenly, Masha again heard the voice that woke her up. A childish, thin voice called someone. The heart immediately shrank. Masha froze in bed, listening. The voice was heard again, now louder. He seemed to have reached right behind the door. Scared, Masha listened for a long time, until she decided to get up, put on her robe, and open the door. The hallway was quiet and empty. Probably, she was surprised, she convinced herself, but the feeling of anxiety only strengthened. She came to the door on the staircase, put her hand on the handle. "Well, you are an adult woman," Masha thoughtfully encouraged herself, although every muscle was screaming to leave. Having gathered, she opened it all the same and stepped on the cold platform. At the bottom, the open waste was blackened, and a tiny handle was sticking out from under a heavy lid, thin and pale, like a porcelain doll. Masha shuddered. The scream stuck in her throat. She threw herself down and, shaking her hands, spread the lid of the garbage can. Empty. No trace, no sound, no hint to her hand. Nothing. Looking down at her, Masha saw that small traces were floating on the floor. She followed them with a look, and a cold sweat fell on her forehead. The traces were coming straight from the door of her apartment. As if the child, a second before her appearance, slipped down barefoot and hid in the garbage can. Masha was in a panic. The horror filled her consciousness. She couldn't stand it and screamed. Suddenly, the sound of the opening door was heard. Nina Alexandrovna ran out to the site in an old dress with a nightdress on her head and an anxious face. "Masha, what's wrong with you?" the neighbor quickly whispered, grabbing her by the hand. "Calm down. Did you hear the child again?" Masha silently sat down to take a breath, but out of fear, she could not say a word. Come on, baby, let's go. I'll make you some tea, and you will calm down and tell me everything." Nina Alexandrovna brought Masha to herself, sat her down at the round table, and turned on the kettle. While she was brewing tea, her hands touched her. The neighbor closely looked at Masha. "Well, Masha, what did you see there?" Nina Alexandrovna quietly asked, moving the sugar bowl to herself. "Don't be afraid. Tell me how it is. I've been living in this house for a long time. You won't surprise me with anything anymore." Masha looked at her, an open face, kind eyes. She took a little more air and tried not to think how ridiculous her story would sound. Lowering her gaze, she quietly began. "Nina Alexandrovna, I heard the child cry. At first I thought it was just the neighbors, but no, the voice was right behind the door. The child seemed to be calling me. Don't think that She hesitated, choosing a softer wording, so that it didn't sound like she had something wrong with her head. Don't think that I have a stormy fantasy, or it is stress at all. I just don't understand where it came from, and it was definitely not a dream." The neighbor listened silently, nodding her head, and a shadow of sadness barely appeared in her eyes. When Masha was silent, Nina Alexandrovna carefully put her palm over Masha's, as if trying to convey her warmth and support. "Masha, don't worry so much. I understand everything," she whispered. "You know how many years I have been living in this house." She made a small sip of tea, covering her eyes, and for a second, fatigue entered her face. "So, Masha, listen, since I asked," she started quietly, making a sip of tea. "A family lived here. A husband, a wife, and a boy. Just a little more. He was no more than 3 years old. Father, at work for days, mother alone with the baby. Well, at first it seemed like everything was calm, and then something broke in her. Or what? They say she began to see and hear everything. Something cracked in her head." Masha listened, keeping her breath. Nina Alexandrovna continued, even quieter, almost whispering. "One night, everything happened. People say they heard her walking down the corridor barefoot, and the child was screaming, calling her. And now, imagine, she took this baby and put him down in a garbage can, like a waste bag. As she was in a nightshirt, she went barefoot, quietly, calmly. And then she slammed the door as if nothing had happened. Masha was horrified, looking at her neighbor, but she, it seems, did not tell this story for the first time. In the morning, her husband came, and she was sitting and singing at an empty bed. They took her, of course, to the mental hospital, but it was too late. The strangest thing is that the body was never found, but the cry remained. Everyone who lives here sometimes hears this voice, as if the boy is looking for his mother. Everything walks the floors and cries, 'Mother, mother.' But don't worry, you'll get used to it. We are all used to it. It's a pity, of course, for the boy, but there is no need to be afraid of him. Just don't tell anyone what you heard. Otherwise, people won't understand. You understand yourself." Nina Alexandrovna took another sip and quietly smiled, as if this conversation was a normal thing for her. Masha was silent all this time, feeling how the ice fingers of fear were compressing her heart. After such a terrible story, she would have been glad to sit in Nina Alexandrovna's kitchen all night. But the old woman was clearly tired, and Masha, gathering her strength, said goodbye to her. She went out into the dark entrance and closed the door behind her, feeling the fear pounding at her back. Masha returned home in some kind of daze. The voices from Nina Alexandrovna's story pulsated in her head. Everything was boiling inside. Fear, disgust, pity,
for the baby and that woman, the mother who became a monster. But the worst was the feeling that she would hear this child's cry again. Silent, barely caught, as if from behind the wall or under the floor. Then it stops. Then it calls again, muffled and hopeless.
Masha turned on the TV at full volume, just to not hear this thin voice. She couldn't fall asleep, turning over until morning, almost not closing her eyes. The next day, Masha went to work with the firm conviction that she would leave the apartment and forget everything that had happened here, like a bad dream. But now it was clear why the price for the apartment was so low. She smiled bitterly to herself. After work, she went straight home, and upon entering the building, called her mother. "Mom, I'll be back soon," she whispered, trying to sound calm. "I won't stay here anymore. I'll tell you later, not now. No, just something is here. I don't know what, but this place is terrible. Just believe me. I'll explain everything to you later, okay?" Suddenly, the light in the entrance went out. Masha shuddered. The phone in her hand illuminated only a small piece of the floor and the wall. Everything else drowned in the gloomy darkness. "Masha," her mother's voice chirped from the phone, "where did you disappear?" Masha? But Masha stood frozen, staring into the darkness, from where the already familiar plaintive cry and awkward steps came again. The sound was very close. "Mom?" It was right at her feet. Masha dropped her phone, and the screen shone with its dim light. In front of her was a boy, barely distinguishable in the half-darkness, as if surrounded by a murky haze. His face was unnaturally pale, waxy-skinned, with empty, as if sucked-out eye sockets, in which there was nothing alive. The dry skin was pulled taut over the bones, making him look like a doll assembled in a hurry. A dead, bloodless half-smile was painfully stretched, frozen in some torturous expression. He was barefoot, wearing only an old-fashioned nightsuit of a dirty gray color. On his chest and shoulders, dark spots were visible, soaked into the fabric. They resembled blood. But the most terrible thing was the boy's neck. Unnaturally twisted, the head was sticking out at a horrible angle. His small hands reached out towards Masha. She couldn't take her eyes off his thin fingers, slowly approaching her. And in that moment, when he took a step closer, she heard a quiet, almost gentle whisper that seemed to cut through her bones. "Mama." Masha ran. The elevator wasn't working, so she leaped over the steps, running up. The boy awkwardly followed, continuing to call for her. "Mama! Mama!" Masha flew up to her floor, but the boy was already standing in front of her apartment door, and he pulled his hands towards her. She rushed to Nina Alexandrovna's apartment and, out of strength, banged on the door. The neighbor immediately opened it, as if she had been waiting for Masha's visit, and Masha burst into the apartment, locking the door from the inside. "Nina Alexandrovna, I saw him. He was chasing me. Masha suddenly fell silent. The words froze in her throat when she noticed the others. In the room, like ghosts, stood her neighbors, silent and gloomy. The couple from the apartment above her, Valentina, an unfamiliar man in a sweatshirt and a stretched t-shirt. All those whom she had seen in the entrance. Their faces were expressionless, as if cut from stone. Nina Alexandrovna came closer and took Masha by the hand. Her gaze was soft but firm, like that of a person who has made a difficult
but inevitable decision.
"Masha," she said, almost affectionately, "forgive me. The boy needs a mother, you understand. He always chooses new ones. I hoped that he would spare you, but this is his home. He chooses. It is not for us to decide." Masha froze as if she was choking, the eyes of the neighbors piercing through her. The man from the upper floor stood in the corner, hiding his eyes, and his wife shook her head with obvious sorrow. "We are sorry that we didn't warn you right away," Nina Alexandrovna continued. "But I told you, we all help each other here. We don't leave each other in trouble. How do you think we've been living here for so many years? That's why I didn't tell you anything yesterday. I knew you would run away. And since he chose, we have to help him." You can't," Masha said, retreating, but Nina Alexandrovna hugged her more tightly, like a mother patting her shoulder. "We help each other, Masha. That's how we live. Understand, the boy needs a mother. And now, it's you." The words echoed in her head, ice cold and clear. A terrible, inescapable silence hung in the room. And then, one of the neighbors gently pushed Masha towards the door. Hands, at first careful, and then more and more confident, pulled her to the exit. She tried to escape, to break out, but the neighbors had already surrounded her in a tight ring, pushing her out into the corridor. They silently and confidently pushed her towards the door, to the exit, to the dark entrance, towards the trash chute. Her legs felt like jelly. There was a fog in her head. Masha struggled, trying to break out of the crowd, but they confidently pushed her towards the garbage chute. One of them was whispering something calming. "Soon it will all be over. Don't be afraid. It doesn't hurt." Masha came up to the chute's lid, trying not to look at the black maw of the hole. "Mom, please, don't," she whispered, but she was already being pushed closer, more rudely, more mercilessly. Masha's gaze fluttered in despair over their faces, looking for the slightest flash of sympathy, a hope for salvation. But everyone she saw was silent, lowering their eyes to the floor. Nina Alexandrovna's hand lay on her shoulder, and a neighbor's voice, calm and cold, whispered in her ear, "Go. Let me go. You've all gone mad. Let me go," Masha screamed. But her scream drowned in indifference, as if everyone here was already used to such scenes. A pale hand appeared from the garbage chute. Masha buckled in horror, and at the same moment she felt an icy touch on her cheek. When she opened her eyes, she saw the boy's lifeless face right in front of her, his empty eyes and unnaturally twisted neck. From his dry, open lips, almost touching her ear, a quiet sound reached out. "Mom." At that moment, as if under hypnosis, Masha took a step back, and something grabbed her, pulling her into the garbage chute, into the sticky darkness. It was the summer of 1996. In Timonogorsk, it was called the Summer of 13 Disappearances. I was still just a boy then. The 90s. The time of pogs and turbo gum, jean jackets and film cameras. It's difficult to imagine now, but we grew up not knowing what a smartphone was. My older brother had a pager, and he was considered the coolest kid on the block. But I don't want to tell you about that. I want to tell you about the video cassette that still sometimes appears in my nightmares. That creepy sound of scrolling film, the mechanical buzzing of a VCR as it swallows the cassette into its dark guts. We were on vacation then. School had ended in June, and our parents worked from morning to evening to feed us. We, 14-year-old teenagers, were left to ourselves and could do whatever we wanted. Roam the streets until nightfall, visit friends, or go to video salons. These were semi-basement rooms where, for a pittance, you could watch bootleg cassettes with action movies or horror films. Such places always smelled of dust and cigarette smoke, and the light barely penetrated through the dirty windows. But when a new pirate cassette was playing, the whole world disappeared. We adored horror movies, and the scarier they were, the better. Hellraiser, A Nightmare on Elm Street. We absorbed movies with greed and were ready to give anything for the opportunity to get a good scare. That summer, Andreyuka got his own VCR, a birthday gift. Of course, it was second-hand. His mother couldn't afford a new one. But even an old VCR was a royal gift at that time. When Andre's mother went to work, we watched cassettes for days. Some we watched until they wore out, but more often we would trade them, finding something new every time. However, exchanging cassettes cost money, and times were tough. We had to get creative. The guys from our block collected glass jars, turned in bottles, especially the half-liter brown beer bottles. One of those was enough for a piece of chewing gum. The morning began with a hunt for bottles. We walked through yards, trash cans, and dumps, collecting everything that came into our hands. If the catch was not enough, we resorted to tricks, swiping a couple of Mom's 3-liter jars from the house, and suddenly we had a solid amount in our pockets. Of course, a scolding was waiting for us later, but we didn't care. For the sake of a new cassette, we were ready for anything. We took the found bottles and Mom's jars to a collection point, and then we went to Uncle Kolya at the market for another cassette. "Well, is that enough for two?" "No, just for one," Andre sighed. Uncle Kolya's stall was at the market, and it was always crowded. Someone was selling jeans, someone was selling stolen electronics, and someone was selling pirate cassettes like Uncle Kolya. The gray-haired 40-year-old man in a leather jacket with gold teeth was our constant supplier. He always knew what to offer boys like us. That day, we ran to exchange the already watched gremlins for something else. Uncle Kolya smiled at us with his golden smile and nodded towards a large canvas bag. "Oh, guys, look, I just got a new shipment today. Have a look in there. You'll definitely find something." We rushed to dig into the huge bag as if it was filled with gifts, action movies, thrillers, comedies. "Look, what is this?" Andreyuka suddenly whistled excitedly. He was holding a cassette in his hands. There was no cover on it, no name, only a stylized skull, painted in red on the side. The skull looked crude, but that was even more intriguing. The cassette seemed to silently say that its contents could scare anyone. That's what we came for. "And this is..." Uncle Kolya took Andreyuka's find and turned it over in his hands. "You know, kid, you might not be ready for this thing. This isn't Gremlins or Freddy Krueger. Who knows what's on there? Let me take a look at it first, and then I'll decide whether to sell it or not." "Oh, come on! We're not little kids," Andre started. "Andreyuka, drop it!" I yelled at him. "Now we'll end up with no movie at all." "Okay, Uncle Kolya, maybe next time." We continued to dig, trying to find something no less valuable. As a result, we had to take an action movie, Bloodsport with Van Damme. When we said goodbye and left the stall, Andreyuka suddenly stopped, looked at me seriously and whispered, "Don't look back and don't run." I looked at him without understanding, and then he, with a sly grin, took out the very same cassette with a skull from his pocket. "Did you steal it?"
I almost jumped out of my skin. Yeah, Andreyuka nodded importantly, puffing out his chest. Cool, right? Now we'll have something to watch tonight. We couldn't wait any longer and ran home, dreaming of what this cassette with a terrible skull on it was hiding. Andre's mother worked shifts, so at night we usually saved the scariest films to make it even more atmospheric. I will never forget how we lay on the carpet in front of the TV, mesmerized by its glow. Back then, it seemed that it would always be like this, that we would never grow up, and there would be nothing more important in the world than horror movies, our friendship, and the light of the TV in a cozy living room. How wrong I was. But then it seemed like a great time. The whole night was ahead of us, a free apartment, and the premonition of something new, unusual. Having waited until dusk, we put the cassette in the VCR. The old Panasonic rumbled, coughed, as if the cassette wasn't to its liking. The screen flickered. Nothing happened. I was already scared that the film was damaged, or maybe just empty. But no, an image soon appeared. However, it was full of static and interference. Lines ran across the screen as if the magnetic tape was badly scratched. The sound was quiet, hissing. The silence of the apartment only emphasized the sinister atmosphere. The image twitched. At first it was difficult to see anything, but then we saw it. In the frame, a semi-destroyed building. Gray concrete walls, peeling and dirty, either an old factory or a warehouse. It was clear that the recording was made with an amateur camera. The image twitched and trembled. The camera angles were constantly changing. Very soon, from such camera work, I started to feel sick. Total nonsense, Andre grumbled, but I just nodded. Something about this video was captivating. It was alluringly anxious. I wanted to know what would happen next. The camera moved forward, gliding through empty corridors, here and there capturing faded graffiti, uncensored inscriptions, and stains of paint. Suddenly, a black metal door appeared in the frame. A quiet, barely audible whisper followed it. The image twitched again, and suddenly the door abruptly swung open. I swear, I saw that no one touched it. The hair on my head stood on end. I swallowed nervously. "What the hell?" Andre repeated. A gut feeling told me that we should turn this video off, but I couldn't tear myself away. Something made me look at the screen without blinking. It was dark behind the door. The whisper became louder. It sounded hideous and creepy in a completely unfamiliar language. Suddenly, a spot of light appeared in the frame. Then another, as if candles were being lit one by one. Very soon, we could already see unclear figures in the darkness. There was something strange about them, unnatural. They slowly became more and more distinguishable, as if someone was sharpening the focus on the film. I was so tense, trying to see inside and understand what was happening on the screen. I wish I had never seen it. There were children on the screen. Boys and girls of our age and younger. I counted at least a dozen. I realized what seemed so strange to me. They weren't standing. They were hanging from the ceiling. Dirty tubes were pulled from their bodies, wrinkled and dried, and went off into the darkness. The children's figures slowly swayed under the ceiling. In time with their movements, the same whisper sounded. But the most terrible thing was not this, but the eyes of the children. They were wide open. Horror was frozen in them.
"That's Sasha." "Sasha Omelchenko," Andrei said. At that time, no one knew about the internet. News was learned from newspapers and acquaintances. The name Sasha Omelchenko in our native Tomonogorsk was familiar to everyone. The boy had disappeared without a trace right from his home. He had been searched for the last couple of weeks. The newspapers wrote that there were no notes, no traces, nothing. The door to the apartment was locked from the inside, and when it was broken down, scattered things, broken furniture, and a working TV were found in the apartment. Our TV continued to show terrible scenes from which the blood in my veins ran cold. I looked where Andrei was pointing. It was really Sasha. He looked as if all the blood had been sucked out of him, but it was impossible to mistake him. His bright blue eyes and acid green wristwatch. Sasha slowly swayed along with the rest of the bodies. Something dark flowed through the tubes connected to his body. Suddenly, the image twitched again, and deep in the room, where the plastic tubes went, some movement appeared. The terrible whisper became louder. Something was moving among the shadows. A sound was heard, heavy, low, as if someone was breathing with painful effort. The camera shook. The suspended bodies began to quiver. The backs of the children arched, their eyes rolled back, and bloody foam came out of their mouths. Suddenly, I saw two burning eyes, yellow with red veins, and between them, two vertical slit pupils. From the dark, a black figure slowly rose, stretching up to the ceiling. It was no longer like a person or an animal, something disfigured, dark. It moved, but not by stepping, but as if it slid smoothly and silently. It was looking for something, turning from side to side. Its breath creaked. The image was getting more and more distorted, as if the camera was unable to cope with what it was showing. "Turn it off!" Andrei yelled, jumping off the couch. But I couldn't move. The yellow eyes slid across the screen, as if they were scanning. My breath caught. The eyes immediately snapped back. The whisper became simply deafening. It filled all the space with itself, and then I realized it had found us. I felt it. I saw it. The figure ran towards the camera. It was already very close. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. Yellow, bloodshot eyes filled the entire frame, and suddenly, everything disappeared. The next second, I saw Andrei. He had the plug in his hands, which he had ripped from the socket. I felt a wave of relief, as if I had just saved myself from a real danger. I looked gratefully at Andrei and nodded. I couldn't say a word from the shock. "What the hell was that? What the hell was that?" Andrei kept repeating. I sat down exhausted in front of the turned-off TV, trying to understand what I had just seen. We didn't immediately come to our senses, but then we discussed everything and decided that the tape must be taken to the police. "Sasha and I went to chess club together," Andrei said grimly. "Maybe they can still do something." I went to the VCR and tried to eject the tape, but it was stuck. No way. Andrei joined my attempts. "What the hell?" he grumbled. "Okay, let's figure something out tomorrow. Maybe we can pry it out or call Valera. He can fix anything. Okay, let's sleep." Yeah, right, sleep. However, we fell asleep almost instantly. Apparently, the stress had taken its toll, but our dream did not last long. I woke up from a quiet noise, from the sound of a scrolling film, which caused a terrible feeling of déjà vu. Through my sleep, I decided it was just a glitch.
The cassette had gotten stuck in the VCR, and now the mechanism had released it, which meant that tomorrow everything would be fine. I sighed with relief, about to turn to the other side, but then a whisper was heard. That very whisper, in an incomprehensible language, piercing and sharp, as if someone was standing right behind us. I opened my eyes and looked at the TV, which suddenly lit up with a dim light. An image appeared on the screen again, but it was no longer the terrible abandoned building. The camera showed a small alley, bushes, benches, a ball that someone had forgotten. It slowly moved along the street, and I felt a growing sense of unease. Something was wrong here. Turning off the alley, the camera went further, capturing broken car tires and potholes in the asphalt. Suddenly, the camera turned and focused on a panel house. Next to it was a bright yellow 24-hour kiosk, and then I realized why I suddenly felt so uncomfortable. It was our district, our street, and the camera was moving straight to Andre's building. "Hey!" I pushed my friend's shoulder, and he jumped up, clutching the blanket. "Look!" The camera slowly came closer to building 19, then to 21, where we were. It smoothly slid past the entrances until it froze in front of ours. "What the hell?" Andre whispered hoarsely.
The evil whisper grew. It felt as if we could physically hear it. I peeked out the window and looked down. No one. Meanwhile, the camera was in the entrance hall and slowly panning over the apartments. Apartment 3.7.10. We were in the last one, 15. The whisper became louder and louder. It crawled into my head and filled all the space with itself. I covered my ears. The number 15 flickered on the screen. He was right. Behind the door. "We need to turn it off. We need to turn off this damn cassette." I went to the VCR and saw that the plug was still lying next to the socket. It wasn't connected to the power supply. The evil whisper was already heard right behind us. We not only heard it, but we felt it on our skin. At that moment, a knock on the door was heard, light, sharp. From fear, it seemed to paralyze us. I couldn't move my fingers. Suddenly, the image flashed. The camera twitched and the screen flooded with darkness. And then they appeared. Eyes. Huge. Evil. They looked straight at us, as if they were burning my soul. I began to shake, but no longer out of fear. Some powerful force was playing with my body. Everything in the room spun. The chair turned over. The curtains began to writhe. Books, dishes, papers, pillows, everything circled in a devilish dance. The eyes on the screen looked straight at me, as if they knew all my fears, all my thoughts. Andre rushed to the door, but at the same moment something grabbed him and pulled him back, right into the screen. As if invisible tentacles had latched onto him. They were dragging him with them into the abyss. He screamed and struggled, but it was useless. I saw his legs disappear into the dark screen, his waist, his chest. Andre screamed with all his might. I jumped up and grabbed him by the hand, pulling towards myself, trying to hold on to my friend, but it continued to suck him in. "The VCR! Break the VCR!" exclamation mark. Andre screamed. His hand slipped out of mine. I jumped forward in a panic, grabbed a heavy statuette from the table, and hit the VCR with all my strength. One blow. The screen blinked. A second blow. The picture shook. The third, and it shattered into 1,000 pieces. It was too late. Andre was gone, but his scream was still echoing in my ears. A cassette was lying on the floor. I grabbed it and smashed it on the floor with all my might. The guts of the black film spilled out. I began to tear it apart, and continued to do so until only small scraps remained from the film. I was sitting in the middle of the wreckage, struggling to breathe.
My body shuddered with a fine tremble. I couldn't process what had just happened. I couldn't believe that Andre was no longer there. My friend had disappeared. Forever. The 13th disappearance of that summer. Since then, I have tried to avoid screens. I use a simple phone. There is neither a TV nor a laptop in my home. Yes, many think I'm strange, but I've put up with it. Who knows? Maybe he will come back, find me, and open his scary yellow eyes again. I opened my eyes and thought with a sigh, another Monday. Only 5 days left until the end of the torment. Sometimes I wanted to send it all to hell, to let this job fail and disappear. Every day was the same. I got up, brushed my teeth, had breakfast, and dragged myself to the office. I worked as a salesman in a hardware store. The salary was miserable, the boss was an idiot, the conditions were hellish. I once had my own small business, but it burned out, and I ended up at the very bottom. There was nowhere lower to fall. I stretched and looked at the clock. 8:10. I needed to hurry. Even a minute's delay in our office was fined, so I scraped myself out of bed and dragged myself to the bathroom. I turned on the water. The pipes rumbled. The tap began to fill with water of all shades of brown. I lived in an old building. Well, not so much old as decrepit. Here, everything was slowly falling apart, and the major repairs, for which everyone paid properly every month, hadn't happened since the time of the Soviet Union. What if it all just collapsed? And I, along with it, I thought, feeling sorry for myself again. As soon as I washed and threw a couple of sandwiches down my throat, I got dressed and left the apartment. On the staircase, I ran into Grandpa Misha. He was sitting on a stool by his door, as he often did, smoking a cigarette. He looked to be about 70, but he was holding on cheerfully. They said that in his youth he worked as a miner, and then moved to the city when his health began to fail. "Good morning, Grandpa Misha," I nodded, passing by. "Good morning, Seryozha," he answered, but his voice was somehow strange, cautious. "Off to work again, I guess. Always running, always in a hurry. What can you do?" I shrugged. "Nothing gets done by itself." "That's true," Grandpa Misha said thoughtfully. "Well, sometimes it's better not to rush anywhere. You don't understand yet, young man, but it's okay. You'll live to my age. You'll understand." I went to the elevator and pressed the button, when suddenly I heard some noise. A bird had flown into the open window of the stairwell and was flapping its wings loudly. When I turned around, I saw that Grandpa Misha had dropped his cigarette. "What is it now?" he muttered, and I went to help. "Grandpa Misha, are you okay?" He nodded, but looked at me with a strange anxiety. "Look here, Seryozha, be careful today." "And why is that?" I laughed, trying to lighten the mood, but Grandpa Misha didn't smile. "The bird flew in. That's a bad sign. They say it means a death is near." "Come on, Grandpa Misha, that's all nonsense." He grumbled and suddenly grabbed my hand, squeezing it with his bony fingers. "Anyway, you'd better take care of yourself, Seryozha. On the roads, look carefully. And here's another thing. You should take the stairs. I don't trust this elevator." "And what's wrong with the elevator?" I was surprised. "My neighbor used to work in the mine. He said that elevators are bridges. On one side is us. On the other is someone else. And if the bridge starts to shake, you can fall anywhere." I felt a chill run down my back. "Grandpa Misha, what are you talking about?" "That's just a fairy tale." He let go of my hand and lit another cigarette. Maybe it's a fairy tale. But you watch yourself, Serioza. You watch yourself. The bird finally got tired of fluttering around the entrance and quietly sat on the windowsill, its wing bent at an odd angle. "I'll take care of the bird," Grandpa Misha grumbled. "And you, Serioza, take care of yourself. Promise?" "I promise." Grandpa Misha always seemed a little strange to me, but he was a good, kind man, so I nodded at him and smiled, as if agreeing. Having looked at the clock, I grumbled, "I'm late." Suddenly there was the noise of the doors opening. The elevator car had finally crawled to our floor. Despite Grandpa Misha's warning, I stepped inside. It would definitely be faster on the elevator. The floor under my feet twitched, the light flickered, and the doors slowly closed with a terrible mechanical creak. I pressed the button for the first floor. After just a few seconds, the elevator froze. Great. We're going to stop on every floor again, I thought. This happened in the mornings. Everyone was going to work, and our elevator, heavy and slow, stood on each floor for a long time. But after a moment, the doors didn't just open, they stayed open. In front of me was a staircase, an ordinary entrance hall, cracked walls, a dim light from the single light bulb under the ceiling, but there was no one at the door. I looked out and scanned the floor. Empty. I rolled my eyes and irritably pressed the door close button, but suddenly I noticed that something was wrong. A huge dark spot was spreading towards the elevator. The puddle spread from one of the doors right towards me. At first I thought it was water, but the longer I looked, the more convinced I became. This is blood. Thick, dark, caked closer to the door. And then I heard a voice, muffled, male, vicious. "You're to blame. It's all because of you." In response, someone almost whimpered, a female voice trembling. "Leave us alone, please." I was shocked, but for some reason I stepped out of the elevator. I just moved forward as if someone had pushed me. With every step towards the apartment from which the voices were coming, the smell became stronger. It smelled of iron and something else. Fear. The door suddenly creaked open, very slowly. A girl appeared in the hall, 8 years old, in an old nightshirt, too thin for November. Her hair was tangled, almost matted, her face was pale, and her eyes, God, her eyes were huge and dark, as if she hadn't slept for a long time, or hadn't lived for a long time. "Will you help me?" she asked in a whisper, barely audible. I wanted to answer, but my throat was dry. I just looked at her and seemed to nod. The girl stepped towards me, but then the door suddenly swung wider, and out of the darkness shot a hand, large, rough, with dirty nails. It clung to the girl's shoulder so hard that she screamed. She was literally yanked back like a doll, and the door slammed with such a rumble that I shivered. A second later, a scream was heard from behind the door. She was calling for help. "Please, help me." I took a step back, then another, stumbling. I didn't know what to do. Run to the door? Suddenly, from somewhere deep inside, an evil male voice roared, "What are you standing there for? Get out!" The door opened again, and this time a man's face appeared in the gap. His eyes were full of rage, his teeth were bared, his face deadly pale like the girl's, but not frightened, angry. He looked straight at me. A knife shone in his hand. I felt a primal fear. My head just turned off. The instinct for self-preservation took over.
I spun around, jumped into the elevator, and began to madly mash the button. The doors began to close, but too slowly. The man rushed toward me, the light of a dark, terrible rage flashing in his eyes. As the doors still crept shut, I heard him screaming something. The words were drowned out by the noise of the elevator, but I was sure that his voice would haunt my dreams for a long time to come. The elevator lurched and went down. I pressed myself against the wall, feeling sweat drip down my back. What was that? Why did she ask for help? And was it even a person? What nonsense. Of course it was a person. I needed to call the police, or someone. I took out my cell phone. No signal. After a few seconds, the elevator stopped. Again. Another floor. I stepped out onto the landing, trying to catch a signal, when I suddenly saw Vera Nikolaevna. She was standing by the window, smoking her thin, almost toy-like cigarette, leaning against the windowsill. Light smoke streamed across the landing, outlining her silhouette. Everything looked ordinary, too ordinary, except for one thing. Vera Nikolaevna died a year ago. I saw the coffin myself, carried out of this very entrance. A dry wave of horror crept up my throat. She turned her head, looked at me, and I felt the earth give way beneath my feet. Seryoja? You? Her voice sounded hoarse, as if coming through a thick layer of water. I wasn't expecting anyone. Well, no matter. It's not as bad as it seems, although... She took a long drag from her cigarette, and I suddenly noticed it, a blue mark on her neck, the distinct shape of fingerprints. Vera Nikolaevna was strangled a year ago, right here, in this entrance. It was a huge case. All the newspapers wrote about it. Just some drug addict or a homeless man. He attacked her for a couple of thousand rubles and a cheap mobile phone. That's all she had on her. She was on her way home from work, had just stopped for a smoke. Wrong place, wrong time. That's what the journalists wrote. Vera Nikolaevna? I exhaled, realizing how ridiculous it sounded. You're dead? She gave me a sharp look, but a strange smile played at the corners of her lips. Well, it happens. But now, no one is waiting for me. No need to hurry, no need to worry. Just stand here all day, smoke, and look at the gray sky. My hand started fumbling along the elevator wall, searching for the button. This is impossible. This isn't normal. She took a step towards me, unnaturally light and silent, as if her feet weren't touching the floor. The smoke from her cigarette suddenly began to settle, forming a thick blanket on the floor, clinging to my boots. Seryoja. Her voice grew softer, but more anxious. You will stay. Everyone will stay here, except those who manage to run away. What does she mean? Run away where? My hand finally found the button, and I slammed it with so much force that my finger ached. The elevator didn't move. Oh, she smiled, looking at me with a kind of lazy interest. I didn't think you were one of the ones who gets scared. My head was spinning. Vera Nikolaevna took another step. I hit the button again. The elevator finally lurched, and the doors began to close. She was standing right by the doors, close, too close. "It's nothing," she whispered. "See you soon." The doors closed and the cab hurried down. I bent in half, racked with fear from what I had just seen. What is going on here? Where am I? See you soon. What the hell does that mean? I didn't have time to finish the thought. The elevator lurched again, forcing me to straighten up. The 5th floor. The doors slowly crawled open. The landing was bathed in a dim, hazy light and a quiet, melodic sound. A female voice singing a lullaby. Bayou, bayoushki, bayou. I froze. I peered out of the elevator and saw an open apartment door. Light poured out from inside, bright, as if someone had just put in a new bulb. A woman sat with her back to me, rocking an empty cradle. Slow, rhythmic movements, a hunched back, monotonous singing. Suddenly the song broke off. She turned around. Her pale face was slightly shiny, as if coated in wax. Her eyes were like glass, yet they still held a flicker of life, or what was left of it. You haven't seen them, have you?" she asked. "My boys." I wanted to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. Newspaper headlines flashed in my mind. Mother and 2 children die in fire at Pravda Street apartment building. "They're somewhere here. Can you hear them?" she continued, reaching her hands toward me. Her movements were jerky, like a puppet on poorly tuned strings. "You'll find them, won't you? They're just little boys. They're scared." I stepped back, but she suddenly fell silent. A fire erupted in the corner of the room, sharp and bright, as if someone had splashed gasoline. The flames devoured the walls, the ceiling, the floor in seconds. The woman didn't notice, or didn't want to notice. She just kept rocking the empty cradle, even as the fire licked at her hands. "Find them, Seryosa. Find them," she screamed, her face beginning to melt, pieces sloughing off her skull. The fire consumed her flesh, devouring her down to the bone. I scrambled back as the flames burst out of the apartment, engulfing the landing. In a panic, I dove into the elevator. My trembling fingers mashed a button, any button. The doors closed. I gasped for air in the cabin, my hands clutching the handrail. The fire, the woman, her eyes. She died. They're all dead. I'm seeing the dead. How is this possible? Am I going crazy? Or is it the elevator? This damned elevator. It's a trap. Why are they here? Why am I here? The thought flashed and was gone as the elevator doors rumbled open once more. Another floor, another meeting. I exhaled, preparing for the next... what? I didn't even know what to expect anymore. This landing looked different. The walls were bare concrete, rusted rebar stuck out in places, and the floor was just wooden planks like a construction site. The air smelled of dampness, dust, and something else, something unpleasant. In the center of the platform stood a man in a construction uniform. He was covered in dust, gray hair sticking out from under his hard hat. The shadows of other workers flickered behind him. "What are you doing here?" the man barked, turning his head toward me. His face was gray, like concrete, and his eyes were sunken deep into their sockets. I froze. "Hey, this house isn't for you. It took us, and it'll take you too." Just then, one of the workers behind him lifted his head. I saw that he had no face.
just a smooth, concrete surface where his eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. He shuddered like a marionette and raised a shovel, aiming it at me. "Run, kid," the foreman said quietly, but his words sounded like an order. "Run while you still can." I didn't wait to hear more. I slammed the elevator button, but the doors wouldn't close. Suddenly, I heard a rumbling, growing louder every second. Concrete started pouring from the corners of the landing. A thick, gray sludge filled the space, flooding the floor and creeping menacingly into the elevator car.
"Run!" the foreman screamed, his voice echoing off the walls. Finally, the elevator doors began to close. In the last moment, I saw the concrete reach the foreman, wrapping around his legs, crawling higher, entombing him right where he stood. His eyes met mine, and for a split second, I saw a strange mixture of horror and relief. The doors slammed shut. The elevator shook violently. The whole cabin felt like it was about to fall apart. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I gasped for air, praying for it to end. The next second, I tumbled out of the elevator, greedily gulping for air. The third floor. Not that it mattered anymore. My head was buzzing, as if I were underwater. The world around me felt less and less real. "Seryoja?" A woman's voice, quiet but clear. I froze. A woman stood in the frame of the landing window. She looked just as she did on the day it happened. Her hair disheveled, her clothes askew, but her face was flattened, caved in, as if from a great fall. A dark stream of blood trickled from the corner of her lips. Larissa. Everyone in the building knew her. The woman with big ambitions that didn't fit into our gray, drab apartment block. She was always in heels, with an expensive manicure, telling everyone how she'd one day move downtown. "I'll stand on my balcony with a glass of champagne," I remember her saying, "and let all you neighbors down here envy me." But it all went wrong. Her husband left her with debts. There was no work, and the dream of a new life vanished, leaving only cheap alcohol and the peeling walls of her apartment. They say she didn't leave her apartment for the last few months. And then it happened. An unfortunate accident, they called it. But who washes their windows after drinking a bottle of vodka? "Do you remember my dream?" she asked, her voice seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Do you remember?" She stepped closer, extending her hands, and I flinched, an icy coldness gripping my spine. Larissa glided toward me, her flattened face contorting into a grotesque parody of a smile. "I just wanted to live beautifully," she repeated. And suddenly, the walls behind her cracked, a sound like breaking bones. Hands began to emerge from the cracks in the concrete. Broken, distorted hands, clawing their way out. They pulled themselves from the walls and scraped along the floor toward me, leaving bloody trails. I was choking on disgust and horror. There were more and more of them, pouring from the ceiling, the floor, the wall behind me. Fingers reached for me, trying to grab my legs, my clothes. One touched my palm, and I felt an icy shock shoot through my entire body. I scrambled away, fumbling for the elevator doors. They opened with a sickening metallic shriek. I dove inside, frantically pressing the button. The doors closed so slowly, and her face suddenly appeared in the gap, concave and close. "You can still make it, Seryoja." The doors slammed shut with a final clang, but her echoing voice pursued me. Oh my God, how do I get out of here? This damned house.
This damned elevator. These damned ghosts. Or maybe I just need to get to the end, to the first floor, and it will all be over. The elevator stopped at the second floor. One last trial then, one last meeting. I didn't know what was waiting for me, but I was ready for anything, as long as it would just stop. The elevator doors opened. I choked on the foul smell, heavy, sticky, and alien. The landing was filled with people. No, not people. They were corpses, yet they were moving, ruined by time, by death, by tragedy. In one corner, a man was hanging from a rope. His neck was horribly elongated, his skin swollen and blue. His feet barely touched the floor, as if he were still searching for a foothold. Lamps on the ceiling flickered, their light reflecting in a dark puddle beneath him. My hand trembled as I reached for the closed door button. But nothing happened. My gaze drifted further. A woman sat on the floor amidst bloody smears, scooping something wet and sticky with her hands. Her own insides. She carefully tried to shove them back into her abdomen, but they just kept spilling out. Her lips moved, but I heard no sound. I was suffocating. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing in on me, trying to drown me. From the darkest corner, a figure emerged. It looked like a broken toy, its limbs twisted at impossible angles. Every movement was accompanied by the sound of grinding bone. It twitched, but it walked, moving toward me with a horrifying stubbornness. Nearby, in a pile of filthy rags and melted toys, sat another woman. Blood poured from her chest instead of milk. She was holding something wrapped in a cloth. Suddenly her head snapped toward me. Her face was covered in scratches, her eyes filled with a bottomless hatred. She whispered, "Do you want to see him?" The bundle in her arms began to move. Something wet, ugly, and hissing writhed its way out. I recoiled, scrambling back into the cabin, desperate not to see any more. "Do you hear us, Seryosha?" They all spoke at once. Their voices merged into one hideous choir, coming from everywhere. There were more of them now, rising from the corners. The walls themselves seemed to bleed and writhe, and more hands reached for me. The crowd was alive. The walls were alive. Blood flowed down them in thin streams, pooling on the floor where new faces began to appear. "You are ours. You will not leave." I slammed the button for the first floor, but nothing happened. Hands grabbed at my clothes, my skin, my hair. I tore myself away, but they left marks on my skin, as if the house itself were branding me, claiming me as part of it. Finally, the elevator doors began to close. One hand shot through the gap. Its fingers twitched, scratching at the air, but the cabin creaked and started to descend. I slid down the elevator wall, trembling, trying to ignore the severed, twitching hand lying on the floor beside me. "It's almost over. It's almost over," I repeated to myself, rocking back and forth like a madman. The elevator stopped with a sharp jolt, and the doors began to grind open. I stumbled out, shaken like a leaf, drenched in a cold, sticky sweat. My heart was racing, my head was throbbing, and my legs felt weak. But I was alive. Alive! In the dim light of the lobby, a crowd of people was gathered. They stood packed together, like at a funeral, paying no attention to me. A man in a thick jacket nervously fumbled with a cigarette. A woman with a grim face clutched a scarf. A teenager with dark circles under his eyes stared at the floor, mesmerized. No one even glanced in my direction.
"What happened?" I managed to ask, trying to push through the crowd.
They didn't answer. I only caught fragments of their conversations. Haven't seen anything like it in a long time. The whole cabin is destroyed. Must have been instant. I carefully pushed past them, trying to understand. No one looked at me. All of their gazes were fixed on the elevator shaft. No way anyone survived that, someone muttered from the back of the crowd. "Look at that mess," a woman's voice said. "The car is crushed like a tin can." I froze. Crushed? I turned. The elevator car I had just stepped out of wasn't there. Instead, there was just the black, gaping maw of the open elevator shaft. I peered down, and my heart seized with terror.
The thoughts screamed through my head. I stood there, not knowing what to do, where to run. I no longer felt the cold concrete beneath my feet, only a soft, sticky surface. I looked down and saw a spreading puddle of blood, in which my own face was reflected. The face of a dead man. If you like the story, then you can support the channel with a like and a subscription. See you